Now we're going to talk about when George was something like less than 10, and he was the lookout in this particular event.
Well, neighbors on a riverfront, Detroit River, and we used to go exploring along the riverfront, different areas. We had sand piles and stuff, all the commodities that were transported along the shores of Detroit. And so my playgrounds actually was conversing up and down Franklin Street around the Detroit River, and whatever the situation created was a place where we kind of looked and found something that would entertain or amuse us. We were exploring all the time, a lot of empty factories and around the riverfront.
And this was during Prohibition when they were trying to smuggle.
And this is during the Prohibition when you could see rum runners with their boats just being chased by the customs people, and they'd be dumping their beer overboard, and then when they were all cleared out, they'd stop and they'd be caught, but they had no evidence, so they let them go. But in the meanwhile, if they were caught, they would take the contraband, the beer and whatever they were smuggling, to the riverfront area where the customs had these docks where they got all the boats that they confiscated from the runners along the docks, and in the meanwhile, when the boats were confiscated and there was nobody attending it, so we used to explore around the riverfront. We saw these boats, we'd strip off the brass and everything and sell it to the Sheenies, which was illegal, but everybody was doing it on the front. And I was around 10 years old or 11. I was just part of the gang that was doing that. I didn't do all of this. I was actually too young. I was just old enough to be with them, but not capable of doing the thing that they were doing because they're all older.
And the customs agents would sometimes just throw the contraband over into the water.
And when the customs guards would catch these rum runners, they'd bring their boats in. They would take all the beer or whatever they had, and the beer was in sacks at that time, and they would just dump it overboard in their docks in the areas along the Detroit riverfront. The customs had a place with their own dock where they dumped. Then when the customs guard, the area that they were in, moved to a new area, so that left that area where they were dumping all that stuff down in the water. So the older kids in our neighborhood, they were diving for it. It was very shallow, and then they'd fish up the beer because the beer was shipped in sacks, and then they would take the beer and go up around peddling it to the local a lot of bootleg joints around the river at that time. So that's a place to sell the beer that they dug up. And so at one time, the older boys had enough money, they thought they ought to buy a car, and they bought a Model T. The older ones, had a hunchback boy who was 21 years old. So we bought this, and now it's part of the gang that was did all the accumulate. Anyway, we had the money, and we bought a car, a Model T, or I forget what brand, and we're sitting in enjoying the reason we were able to buy the car, we had this, Benny was a 21-year-old boy, but he was a hunchback, so he's the one that could sign up and make these purchases as an adult. And the first excuse me, first trip we took with the new car that our gang bought, somebody thought that it sounded like the rear end needed some work done because it rattled a little bit. So they said, I can fix it. So he drives the car into his yard, and he takes it all apart. We only had one trip with it after we bought it, and we take it to help find where that lock was, and he took everything apart. And he had all his parts through it, and he didn't know how to put it back together, so he only had one ride in that car. And that ended that thing.
Going back, there was you were sometimes the lookout sitting on top of the fence.
Well, when they were diving for beer at the customs where they used to be, and they moved, and it was unattended, and it's diving along the dock, and it was fenced in. And I was the youngest one. I was the lookout guy. I'd sit on top of the fence, and it has a gate. And then when they try to trap our guys in there on government property, and I'd tell them, here they come. So they all jumped over the fence. Because they would just stream right in it, just so they catch on their property. And after you're off the off the property, they couldn't do anything. And one time I got trapped. They all jumped over the fence, but I couldn't make it. I was too small. And they looked at me. I was too young. They couldn't arrest me. And they just slapped me until I get out. And I did. But I was always part of the gang, and I was always the smallest guy, the youngest guy in the gang, because I didn't have any brother or sister, so I was always part of the gang. That's simply.
How many people were in this gang typically?
Oh, 5 or 6 boys, older boys, and it wasn't a real mob gang. It was just where you gang together, and maybe next week you have another gang, but different guys. So it wasn't a real formal gang where you just dying to one group. It was just a pickup group for whatever the situation called to be done.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful story.